Hector was planning on reverting back to a half-demon entity to get the other demon out of Mabel once and for all. But if Chris and his family saw this, they would all probably have died from shock. And that was where I came in. I had to coax his family to leave, saying that the holy incantations, or whatever, only worked when less people were there. At that point, they were willing to believe anything, and they went without a fuss. The second part of the plan was for me to grab Mabel once Hector figured out the demon's name. Hector would distract the demon with casual banter as I snuck near enough that I could jump when the time was right. Hector knew the name of each and every demon in hell, not because he had a particularly good memory, but because demons gossiped a lot, and he used to be popular enough to be in the know about all the latest gossip. Apparently, there were a lot of scandals in hell that put our tabloids to shame. In any case, he just needed to get a good look at Mabel, and he would have been able to tell who it was. A demon's weakness was its name, and he knew that once he physically said the demon's name, it would be rendered shocked and paralyzed for a split second. In that split second, I was to grab Mabel and hold her down while Hector physically extracted the demon from her soul. A demon needed some time before repossessing a body, so in that time, Hector would keep it away from us. Then, he would kill the demon, consume it, and all would be well. Mabel would be fine, and he would get the money. Theoretically, it worked, but we never got to practice this in its execution, and I was worried that in all my nervousness, I would mess up and hurt Mabel. She was already in such a fragile state as is, and I didn't want to make it worse. We had no other choice, though. We were already so far in, and it wasn't like there was any better options out there. Hector gave me the signal. He looked at me and nodded towards Mabel. It was time to put the plan into action. Hector uttered the demon's name. I can't even spell it because it was so long and incomprehensible, and Demon Mabel froze in place from the seizure. Demon Mabel then began to scream. I immediately lunged at her, wrapping her torso in the fake stole in one motion to keep her limbs from thrashing too much. Mabel's jaw opened so much it looked as if it was unhinged, and her eyes rolled back in her head. From her mouth slowly emerged, in a mess of sticky saliva and blood, a smaller grey creature that looked like an undeveloped fetus. Its head was larger than its body, and it had 3 bulging eyes on its face, each eye a different size and shape. It had one oval-shaped mouth with small teeth lining the sides, and its body looked like a pot-bellied child. Its limbs looked scrawny in relation to its big stomach. It really was tiny, compared to what Hector was emerging into. Hector's half-demon form was scary in its own way. He already warned me that I would be shocked at what I saw, but I really wasn't ready for this. He was easily 3 times the size of his human form, and was really pushing the limits of what the room could hold without breaking apart. His top half somewhat looked like a human's torso, except it was impossibly large and covered in pitch-black, shaggy fur. His bottom half resembled a mutant horse. He had 6 hooved legs and a tail with a small flame at the end. His face was no longer that of a human's, but more of an elongated, cracked and scarred skull with those large antlers that I saw in the subway. His neck stretched like a giraffe, and he had a gaping hole in his stomach area where smoke was coming out. He looked like something straight out of a horror movie. If this was only his half-demon form, I couldn't imagine what he looked like as an actual demon. "Sorry you have to see this," Hector apologized, sounding somewhat genuine. "I kinda wanted to keep you from seeing me like this, 'cause I think I look pretty ugly." His mouth kind of resembled that of a dog's, with gigantic teeth and a long, forked grey tongue. I shook my head, assuring him it was fine. I've lived with him for too long for something like this to faze me. Besides, there were bigger problems at the moment. "Don't worry about that now, he's..." The demon wasted no time in lunging at Hector, even though it was greatly outmatched in size. The demon was smaller than me, which was funny considering the circumstances. It could have probably still mauled me, though. Hector just casually swatted the demon away with his gigantic hand, and the demon tumbled outside of Mabel's room. Hector followed suit, and because he couldn't fit through the doorway, he ended up breaking the wall to get through. I groaned. That was going to be a bitch to explain to the Pollacks. "Hey, can you be more careful?" We can't destroy their house if we want to get paid. I yelled, worried about the monetary compensation. Yeah, sorry, I'll be sure to keep our demonic conflict to a minimum, because trying to get rid of this guy isn't difficult enough already. Hector called sarcastically. I winced. I kind of deserved that. I heard a high-pitched screech coming from the hallway, and hoisted Mabel into a fireman hold as I ran out to see what was going on. I arrived just in time to see Hector kick the smaller demon down the stairs, then jump on top of the demon, crushing it with his weight. However, the smaller demon managed to grab a kitchen knife at some point, and he buried it into Hector's leg. Ow! Hector howled in pain, and the demon used that as an opportunity to frantically scurry away. Hector swiped at his leg and at the demon at the same time, but lost balance and fell over to his side. He crashed into the pollack's intricate display of china plates, and they all cracked under Hector's weight. I held on to Mabel tightly as the demon glanced at us. It gave a shit-eating grin and swiftly ran in our direction. It probably figured out that he could repossess either one of us and make it harder for Hector to fight it. I ran back as far as I could, but realized the hallway was at a dead end. Determined to protect Mabel, I turned my back to the demon so it would knock into me instead of her. She'd already suffered enough, and if the demon was going to target someone, it was going to be me. But the demon never made it far enough. Hector had caught up to the demon, swiftly brought out his claws, and slammed his hand through the demon's stomach area. I heard a gross squelch as the demon's 3 eyes widened and it let out a shriek. What I could only describe as demon guts came spurting out of the demon in large quantities, and it went limp almost immediately after Hector shoved his hand back out. I could feel the demon guts splatter on me, and I groaned in disgust. Once everything seemed settled, I turned back to face the demon and Hector. Inside Hector's hand was a pulsating, stomach-looking organ that he tipped his head back and swallowed. I heard an audible gulp, and dark smoke fizzled out of Hector's dog-like mouth. He then swallowed the demon whole. The small demon slid down Hector's esophagus easily. Almost immediately after he swallowed the demon, Hector's fur began to shed at an alarming rate. I watched as all the fur and large body melted away to reveal Hector's human form underneath it all. He looked tipsy, teetering from side to side. Hector did mention that it took a lot of energy to do this, and he was probably extremely tired. I propped Mabel up against the wall, ran behind Hector, and caught him just as he lost balance. "I've got you," I reassured him. Hector looked dazed and mumbled in confusion. "Get a hold of yourself. Why is fried chicken talking to me?" Hector asked, head swaying from side to side. I sighed. He was probably seeing things from exhaustion. I dragged him over to where Mabel was and propped him up next to her. I grabbed his stole and shoved it into his arms so he could put it on again to look presentable for the family. Hector didn't look like he was in explicit pain, just fatigued and maybe suffering from the demon equivalent of indigestion. He did mention before that eating a fellow demon wasn't pleasant. It was akin to a lactose-intolerant person ingesting dairy, even though they knew it was bad for them. In fact, his dark circles looked worse, and his normally tan skin looked greyish. I checked his leg for the stab wound from the smaller demon, but saw nothing, to my relief. Hopefully he was just tired and nothing more. "Are you okay? Is it all over now?" I asked cautiously. Hector burped loudly and refocused, eyes rolling back in his head a few times before he could finally fixate his gaze on me. "Yup, it's all good, but that was the nastiest tasting thing I've had in my life, and I've eaten cow intestines before," Hector said. "My stomach hurts. I think I threw up in my mouth." Hector pulled on the fake clergy stole. I scoffed. He was fine. "Wait, does this violate anything for you? Does eating a fellow demon break any rules of yours?" I asked, genuinely curious. I should have asked this earlier, but it didn't occur to me that this could have been a violation of Hector's world's laws. I felt like Hector was breaking a lot of rules in this world, and wondered if there would be serious repercussions back home. And though it wasn't really my problem, I was also a little concerned. Yes, obviously. You humans throw cannibals in jail when you catch them eating other humans. What I did was basically cannibalism, but even worse. It's kinda looked down upon for bigger demons to bully smaller demons. You didn't bully it. You saved someone's life. Yeah, also against the rules. Demons don't save people's lives unless we're contractually bound to them. We torture them and eat them. Saving them's for the angels. Shit. I rubbed the back of my neck nervously. So are you going to get in trouble? Well, I don't know. I've always been good at finding loopholes, so I guess I'll have to figure something out. And is Mabel? We both looked over to Mabel, who still seemed unconscious. Her body was still bruised and battered, but she was breathing softly and was probably just knocked out from exhaustion. The sleep deprivation and thrashing the demon forced her to go through definitely took a toll on her little body. She's fine, Hector said, waving her off. I mean, she'll be fine physically. She's probably going to need a lot of therapy after what she just went through, though. The Pollocks could not thank Father Sanchez enough for his unorthodox methods of exorcising the demon. Even though he created a huge mess in their house, they were grateful when Mabel woke up and wasn't speaking in tongues, throwing books and spinning her head 360 degrees every 5 minutes. Besides, they chalked the damage up to demonic activity and didn't blame Hector like I thought they would. As promised, they provided the $10,000 in cash installments for helping their daughter. The local church even threw in a couple packs of rotisserie chicken after hearing Hector loved chicken. They coupled it with a self-fryer and a bucket of frying oil, all wrapped up nicely with a bow and everything. Hector was ecstatic. This was more than he had bargained for. It made up for him being forced to eat the demon and suffer a week of indigestion. Mabel woke up, confused and bound to a hospital bed. She still suffered from severe malnutrition and various other physical ailments, including an unhinged jaw that they had to bolt back together. It was a miracle she was still alive, considering her neck did suffer through a lot of 360-degree spinning while the demon possessed her. She didn't remember anything from her time possessed, except of a large black deer monster fighting a smaller baby monster that her parents believed was a side effect from the possession. After a few days, her bruises and cuts began to heal up, and she was able to stomach light soups and soft bread without throwing it all up. The doctors said she would be just fine, which was a miracle in itself. They still couldn't figure out why she was so injured and refused to accept that it was a possession. I couldn't blame them. I used to believe in cold hard science too, but now I knew better. On a positive note, Mabel really liked Hector, and Hector seemed to like Mabel back. He straight up told her about how he fought the demon, and she ate it all up, asking copious amounts of questions and demanding the gruesome details. Her parents thought he was just humoring her. Little did they know, Chris and I remained amicable. From his perspective, he was just glad his sister was safe, but also had small reservations about Hector. He said that he felt a weird energy from Father Sanchez. I shrugged in response, saying Chris was probably just imagining things from being so unhinged by his possessed sister. He left it at that. Hector's successful exorcism in curing the impossible reached the ears of the church community quickly, and he was immediately extended invitations and pleas to travel across the country to heal others. But Hector refused, saying he had enough to survive off for a few months, and told me he would take jobs on a case-by-case basis. I agreed, and left him alone. He now had a source of income, and though it wasn't exactly steady or orthodox, we didn't have to worry about rent. In fact, I set up a website for him, putting my degree to work. I titled it Father Sanchez's Exorcism Hotline, where people could input their requests and write out the details of why they needed Hector to visit and bless them with an exorcism. This allowed us to keep track of the requests easily, and we had received a lot of requests in a matter of weeks. Now I had a new problem. My apartment reeked of fried meats from him throwing just about anything he could physically eat into the fryer. The smell of oil was disgusting and stuck to my clothes. Hector seemed to have grown a strange affinity for it, but this was yet another entry I had to add to my ever-growing list of things roommates shouldn't do. Hey guys, I'm back with another thrilling update. Well, thrilling for you and terrifying for me. At this point, I've just accepted that weird shit is going to happen to me, and I've even grown to welcome these new experiences with an open heart and an open mind. Maybe one day, Hector's half-demon form won't be the subject of my darkest nightmares. and everything will be just fine. Yeah, that's a lie. Seeing demonic creatures and souls still keeps me up at night, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to get these images out of my head. Speaking of Hector, he hasn't been feeling too good. The half-demon debacle seemed to really take a lot more from him than he had anticipated. He had been eating significantly less fried chicken than he used to, and has been groaning in bed all day for a week, watching crime shows on his phone. He'd also been sneezing a lot, and we couldn't figure out why. He told me that if he wanted to keep his human body from rapidly decaying, he needed time to heal. That meant that he couldn't revert back to any form of his for a while, and fights between otherworldly creatures were out of the question. It also decreased his sensitivity to things of his world, being that all his demonic essence or whatever had to focus on repairing his own soul internally. He insisted that I didn't have to worry, that if anything happened, he'd find a way to take care of the problem, but with everything that's been going on, I couldn't help but be a little bit worried. Just the other day, I had a problem with a nightmare-sucking leech from hell that had been giving me bad dreams for a few days. It had snuck into the house through the portal because it slipped under Hector's radar. It didn't take much to kill it. Hector simply stepped on it and it burst open, but it was still worrisome because if such a small creature could sneak into my house, who's to say other creatures haven't already? In other news, Hector was a pretty annoying sick person. Instead of fried chicken, he had turned to chicken noodle soup for comfort because it went down easier and still retained some soul. He constantly demanded chicken noodle soup and made me feel bad when I took longer than 15 minutes to do his bidding by whining about how he broke several laws for me and how all he wanted was some soup before he was whisked away to a trial for his crimes. I didn't take him too seriously. It was clear he just wanted something to hold over me so he wouldn't have to physically get up from his bed. But I complied. The sooner Hector got better, the better it was for the both of us. On top of Hector's melodramatic woes, we found ourselves in yet another very rocky situation involving our own neighborhood. I mentioned before that I genuinely love my neighborhood for the people and its reputation for being a relatively safe area in the city. But lately, we've been experiencing an exponential growth of pet disappearances, specifically cats. Owners would come back home to find their cats gone, but found no sign of forced entry or any other signs of kidnapping. This had been happening in nearby areas for a while in scattered instances, but it had no concern of being a pattern before now. The investigations really kicked into high gear once owners began to receive taxidermies of their stolen cats on their doorsteps. This was quickly turning into a cat owner's worst nightmare. Police put a plea in the news asking for anyone who knew anything pertinent to the investigations to come forward. They put out a neighborhood watch, but despite the patrolling, pets still kept disappearing. In 1 week, 8 cats had disappeared from various owners in the neighborhood, including one from our own apartment. And to think, the last thing I fed her was Purina, Naomi wailed into her hands. Naomi lived on the opposite end of our floor and had moved in 2 weeks ago, which was around the same time she adopted her tabby cat, Stacy. She was a part-time package handler at the local UPS, and I learned that she went to the same school as I did, but she was in the art department, which explained the brushes, easels, and paints haphazardly thrown about all over her home. I didn't know her well, but I did know that she was a nice girl who loved her cat. Unfortunately, Stacy was the latest victim of the string of kidnapped pets in our neighborhood. Hector and I encountered Naomi on the elevator after a chicken noodle soup run, and she asked us if I could come over and help her find her cat. I had been trying to console her about Stacy's disappearance. Behind her, Hector was licking the canned cat food, only to appear disgusted with the flavor. I gave him a hard glare, and he caught on, putting the cat food back where it belonged. Listen, it's going to be okay. I'm sure she'll turn up soon. Don't cats naturally go out on their own often? I asked, trying to be helpful. Not indoor cats, Naomi sniffled. Indoor cats aren't supposed to go out in the same way, and I just adopted her 2 weeks ago, so she's still getting accustomed to this place. I spotted Hector staring at the food bowl and coughed, getting his attention. Yup, not a sign of her around. Hector nudged the food bowl with his foot. He sneezed. We searched every nook and cranny of this place, and all I found were a bunch of hairballs. I just don't understand why someone would abduct other people's pets like that. Naomi wiped her nose on the back of her sleeve. She was thumbing a picture of Stacy. It looked like any other tabby cat save for a distinct deformed heart-shaped patch of fur on her face. I mean, it happens, you know, there's a bunch of sick people out there who like eating animals. Hector began, but I elbowed him sternly. He means, I said through gritted teeth, that we'll help you look for your cat, but there's no guarantee that your cat may turn up the way you want her to. That set Naomi off in another set of wails, and I rubbed her back in solidarity. She excused herself to the bathroom, and I leaned back in her couch. I was upset for her. I used to have a cat when I was younger, and he lived for a long time before dying of old age. He was an outdoors cat, though, and he would go in and out of the house all the time. Hector sneezed again. God damn it, I forgot I was allergic to cats. I cocked a brow. Demons are allergic to animals? Not all animals, Hector sneezed into his sleeve. He rubbed his nose. Just cats, but I should only be allergic to their souls. Maybe Hector Sanchez was physically allergic to cats as well. I had long given up on trying to understand Hector's weird demon ways, so I just nodded like I knew what he was saying. It seemed kind of stupid that demons would have allergies, but he explained that cats were special. They weren't like regular souls. They baffled even the wisest of demons and humans alike, and roamed freely between the two worlds. If all dogs went to heaven, all cats went to hell, not to get tortured for all eternity, but simply because they wanted to be there. They did the same things in hell that they did in the human world. Sit, observe, chase the occasional red laser dot, eat mice. Hector also confirmed that cats really did have 9 lives, meaning some of the alley cats that I saw in the neighborhood frequently were probably older than I was. I always thought cats were silently planning their world domination, but I didn't think it was actually true. You know, Naomi walked out of her bathroom drying her eyes with a tissue. I really don't want to point fingers, but I've been thinking about this for a while. I have a bad feeling that I know who took Stacy and the other pets. Who? I asked. Naomi sat down, smoothing her skirt anxiously. Are you familiar with Jim, the superintendent? She said hesitantly. I really don't want to say this, but I think that it's him. He's awfully quiet and I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I was in the elevator with him the other day, and I saw him carrying a bird in a cage one day, and I'm pretty sure it was taxidermized. This was around the same time the 6th cat got stolen from the neighborhood, and everyone knows how much he hates cats. He's tried to get them banned from the building every single board meeting they have. And not to jump to conclusions, but the kidnapper has been sending the taxidermized pets to their owners. I finished her thoughts, but I didn't know if I agreed with Naomi's theory. I didn't know Jim, but I wasn't comfortable pinning the blame on him. He was the most stereotypical cranky 70-year-old man there was, and if his apartment had a lawn, he'd be telling kids to get off it. I'd always shoot him a smile when I spotted him cleaning the lobby of the apartment, but he'd never respond. His son-in-law was the owner of this building and graciously gave him the superintendent job as a pastime for his old age. Even though he was cranky, I never pegged him to be an animal killer. I was ready to shut that idea down. But Hector looked interested. He'd been watching a lot of crime shows and his interest in human murder mysteries was piqued. Go on, he encouraged. The only thing is, I don't have proof, Naomi sighed. It's all just a stupid feeling I have, and we don't have the security footage to back it up. Yeah, I don't know. We have nothing to base this off of except our own gut feelings, and that's not going to fly with the police, I said. Well, if what you're saying is true, and he has a taxidermized bird in his house, who's to say he hasn't done it again? Hector suggested. He was getting too into this detective play. It's still all too vague, Naomi said. Where are we going to find proof? From Jim himself. I still didn't want to go along with this. I just wanted to help find Naomi's cat, not blame some old man for something he may or may not have done. Hector, on the other hand, was adamant on playing detective. He'd been watching way too much Law and Order. Hector and I knocked on the superintendent's room, where we were greeted by cranky old Jim. "Yes?" he asked, scowl evident on his face. He clearly didn't want us to be there. Hector glanced inside the room while I gained Jim's attention. "Hi, we were wondering if you've seen this cat anywhere?" I held up a missing poster of Stacy, and Jim glared at the poster for a brief second before shaking his head. "Never seen it in my life." He began to close the door, and I stopped him. "Wait, are you sure? You didn't even look properly." "I'm telling you, I've never seen it before in my life. Cats are evil. Now scram. Don't bother me unless you got a leak or your hot water's not working." Jim slammed the door, and I turned to Hector, who nodded and sneezed again. Friendly guy. And he's right, cats are evil. Anyway, Naomi's taxidermy story checks out. Dude's got a dead bird still in its cage. "But that doesn't tell us anything," I said. "Can't you read his mind or something, see if he's lying or not?" "Again, just 'cause I'm a demon doesn't mean I have magic powers. And I'm sick, so I can't even do the bare minimum." Hector sighed. "Look, if you ask me, we're going about this the wrong way. No one asks a murderer if they murdered someone. They're not going to admit to it unless they're Charles Manson. If you want to do this, you have to think like a cat killer." "I don't know how to think like a cat killer. And that's where I come in," Hector said. "I've dealt with cat killers before, tortured the crazy out of them. And you know where cat killers go? To hell? No, to secret hiding spots. But yes, also to hell. There are 8 cats still missing, right? That's a lot of animals to stash away. You can't just keep them lying around in your room. They'll smell like death. And neighbors definitely would have noticed already. You need an area all to yourself, somewhere no one else will bother going to. And that is... Think about it. Where do suspicious things always happen in horror movies? Where do people get locked up so that no one can find them? Where are you going with this? Basements. Okay, I may have been watching a lot of crime shows, but I think it won't hurt to check out the building's basement. It's below the ground floor. We have a basement. Yeah, Hector tossed me a ring of keys. And here's how we're getting in. Dude, I exclaimed. Did you steal this from Jim while we were talking? Not stole, borrowed. He's old. He didn't even notice. We'll return it later once we find out that he's the killer. I don't know, Hector. We promised to look for Naomi's cat, not launch an investigation. I don't think her cat would be in a dusty basement. Wouldn't it be roaming the streets looking for food or something? Okay, how about this? We'd be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. We can look for the cats in the basement, and if it turns out they're there, then I'd say that's pretty compelling evidence to throw Jim in prison, since he's technically the only person with direct access to the basement. I still think this is a stupid idea. We're not even cops. But of course, I had to go along with his stupid idea. I walked down the creaky steel stairs, coughing as the dust flew into my lungs. The steady whirring of a fan blocked out a majority of the sounds down here. Hector told me to go on ahead because he had fallen into another sneezing fit as soon as we neared the basement. I lit up my phone's flashlight and explored the cramped basement. It was dingy and musty and looked as if no one visited in a while, which was probably accurate. There were cans of paint here and there, but nothing indicative of animal cruelty. I sighed. This was indeed stupid, and I didn't know why I was playing along with Hector's stupid detective scheme. I was about to turn around when I noticed a small opening at the end of the hall that led into a smaller, dimly lit hallway. I gingerly tiptoed into the smaller hallway, only to find a bunch of boxes taped and ready to be shipped. The lack of dust on the boxes instantly told me that they were recently packed. I knew something was weird instantly, and ripped open the box nearest to me, only to be shocked by what I saw. My hunch was on the mark as I ripped more boxes open. This small area in the basement was full of still, taxidermized animals neatly packed into shipping boxes, all of which fit the description of the house pets that were missing. Various cans of paint, needles, scalpels, and glue were strewn around in other boxes. I looked down at my phone, at screenshots of all the missing posters, comparing them to the frozen animals in the boxes, and to my dismay, they were all unfortunately a match. How the hell was Hector's stupid horror movie theory correct? I heard the basement door open and flinched, worried I was trapped in the creepy basement with a cat killer. I texted Naomi to meet us here. Thank God it was Hector and not a cat killer. Although Hector was a human eater, so I don't know if I was completely in the clear. He raced down the basement stairs after locking it upstairs. Hector, you were right. I don't know how, but you were. I showed him the missing posters when he found me in the little hallway. All the pets that disappeared? They're all down here, frozen and ready to be shipped to their owners. And I guess that's Stacy, Hector whispered. Or at least, what's left of her. He pointed to the box I had ripped, filled with packing peanuts, with Stacy's body in a curled-up position, looking as though it was sleeping. I gulped, feeling bad for Naomi. This was going to be hard for her. That's why it wasn't in Naomi's place or anywhere we looked, I realized. It was down here with the others all along. This is big, Hector. We need to report this. Yeah, but something's off. Hector muttered to himself, crinkling his nose. He glanced down at his phone as if he were trying to make sense of something. This whole situation is off. It's nuts. Whoever the person is, they probably came back down to tape and shipped the boxes to their owners. We have to report this, I tugged on Hector's sleeve. This is fucking sick. No matter who the killer is, we have to get the police down here first so they can collect the evidence. Hector was oddly quiet. He looked around the room at the taxidermized animals, a look of confusion on his face. He looked at his phone again, reading through a message he had just received. All of a sudden, his eyes shot wide open and he looked alarmed. No, we have to get out of here now. Hector grabbed my wrist, looked around frantically, and made a beeline for the area furthest from the entrance of the basement. I was confused at his sudden change of tone. We then heard a knock and Naomi's distinct voice asking, "Hector, are you down here? I just got your message." "Now," I began to reply, now that there was some sort of closure for Naomi, but Hector put his hand over my mouth and dragged me to the end of the hallway, where there was a vent just big enough for someone my size to squeeze into. My protests were muffled as Hector quickly unscrewed the vent, grabbed me, and shoved me in. He then closed the vent again and shut the vent shutters from the outside. The loud sound of the fan buffeted my ears even more in here. It was an extremely tight fit, and I had to scrunch my body to fit. "Dude, what are you doing? We have to tell Naomi what we found. Stacy's right there," I whisper-yelled, wondering why Hector was acting so weird. "Go through the vents back outside and call the police to the basement when you're away enough. I'll keep her busy," Hector said hastily. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, just as the lock clicked open. I heard footsteps descending down the stairs. I adjusted myself so my head faced the vent. I was wrong. It wasn't the old man who was abducting the animals. It was her. Hector muttered solemnly as I looked through the small cracks between the shutters of the vent to see what was happening. I should have figured this out sooner. He walked away from the vent just as Naomi came into view. I froze. "What? Oh, Hector, I was really hoping you wouldn't see this before I got here." I heard Naomi's voice tilting, the sound of a taser gun, and Hector's yelp as a sizzling sound permeated the room, and a thud as Hector fell to the ground. I put my hands over my mouth to stop myself from yelling out, watching through the cracks as Naomi hastily dragged Hector's limp human body across the hallway until I couldn't see him anymore. This was the biggest plot twist of the century. Naomi was the one who was abducting the house pets, not Jim. I knew I couldn't to stay to see if she would come back. Hector knew what he was doing, and him having close to no energy to fight her off. It was up to me to find someone to bring. I needed to get away from her far enough to be able to call the police without her knowledge. But I had one problem. I had no idea where these vents led. I should have known better than to go along with Hector's stupid games. Now he and I were both in trouble. To my surprise, I heard a soft meow in the distance and looked up into the slope to see two glowing eyes staring back at me. I shone my flashlight to see a transparent-looking tabby cat lazily swinging its tail and almost screamed. What was a cat doing in the vents? Rather, why was it so transparent? Upon closer inspection, I saw on her face a patch of orange fur in the shape of a deformed heart. My heart stopped, That mark was all too unique to belong to another cat. This was definitely Stacy. I was astonished. I had for sure seen Stacy's body in the box between the packing peanuts, cold and hard. But then I recalled what Hector had said about cats. They're special, baffle both demons and humans, and they have 9 lives. I stared back at Stacy with awe. Stacy gave me a tired look that seemed to say, "Are you coming or not?" She proceeded to walk away from me, and I hurriedly crawled after her, as quietly as I could, and as much as the cramped space let me. My back almost touched the top of the vents, so it was very difficult getting around, but the tight fit also let me climb up slopes easily. The vents were old and mouldy, and I swore I saw spider webs at every corner. I hated spiders, but I knew I had to swallow my fear because bigger things were at stake here. Stacy led me through the vents efficiently and stopped when she arrived at a certain patch of light poking through a vent hole. "Is this where I need to be?" I asked Stacy. She didn't have to answer. Stacy licked her paw casually as the vent gave out on me, and I belly flopped on a pile of debris and an old green couch. "What in the name of hell?" Jim exclaimed, grabbing a baseball bat from the corner of his room. Stacy had led me directly into the superintendent's room. He had been watching a baseball game from his dining table when I came crashing in from the vents into his living room. The building was clearly very old and was in desperate need for internal repair if the vent gave in so easily like that. I scrambled on the couch with my hands up in surrender. "Wait! I can explain this." I cried out desperately, scrambling to my feet. Jim lowered his bat, and I explained everything to him. Hector's strange hunch about the basement, Naomi's true intentions, and how Hector may have been in danger now that he knew the truth. Even though my words were all jumbled, Jim seemed to understand and quickly dialed 911. For an old man, he had a very good reaction time and kept his cool under pressure. I felt bad for ever doubting him, even if it was just a little. As he explained the situation to the operator, I glanced at his taxidermized bird in its cage on a small coffee table, right next to a small photo of Jim and his family, with a younger girl, who looked to be his daughter, holding the same cage with the same bird. "All right, police should be arriving soon. You stay put. I'm going into the basement." "What? No, that's a horrible idea. You're old, and she has a taser." "I have a knife," Jim said, whipping out his Swiss Army knife from his pocket. "And a bat, and I served in Vietnam." "Again, you're old, and she has a taser. Look, I'll go. Naomi caught my roommate in the room, and she's not going to let him go now that she knows he knows the truth. I need to go back and help him out." Jim looked reluctant, but acquiesced, knowing I had a point. He could barely climb ladders to fix light bulbs. He wasn't going to be able to take on a younger, swifter girl with a taser. I then asked him for help to get back into the vents, so I can crawl back to where I left Hector and Naomi. Jim sincerely advised against going back, but I knew I had to go back in for Hector. He was barely keeping his physical form together, and I knew he couldn't deal with Naomi the same way he dealt with Amy and Demon Mabel. He was all out of juice, and therefore Naomi actually posed a credible threat to him. Jim reluctantly agreed to let me go and handed me his baseball bat and Swiss Army knife, telling me to take it with me, just in case. Jim hoisted me up back into the vent, and I hoped to God that the vents wouldn't give out before I reached Hector. I couldn't see Stacy anymore, but I had a vague idea of how to get back. I made my way through the vents as best as I could, and to my relief, I knew I had made it back when I saw Hector tied up on a chair from the vents. The situation was entirely too similar to what I had been through with Amy. "And how'd you know it was me?" Naomi asked, arms crossed with her taser in hand. I walked into the middle of the conversation. Hector must have woken up. Of all the people to suspect, why me? "I don't know. I guess you can say I have a talent for sniffing out the crazies." Hector shrugged. I didn't know you thought I was crazy, and here I thought we were getting along just fine." "You're not my type, sorry," Hector snarked. I could hear him rolling his eyes. "So I'll ask you again, where's Finn?" Her question didn't sound like a question, more like a demand. "I'm telling you, I don't know. He's probably at school or something." Hector was desperately trying to keep the attention off me. "Let me tell you how this was supposed to go. You texted me, and I responded like I was clueless. Upon entering and seeing everything, I would have acted like this was a shock, and we could have reported this together. It was the perfect alibi. Two people going down to the basement to look for paint when we stumbled upon a bunch of dead animals ready to be shipped to their owners. And who's the only one who technically has legal access to the basement? Jim. Yeah, real great thinking. What are you going to do now that I know it's you? Kill me? Don't be ridiculous. I'm just going to have to change my plans a little. I realized, what a coincidence that you moved in just weeks before my cat disappeared. And then it came to me. Why not frame you instead? You obviously didn't get those keys from Jim with his approval. Even I had to steal it to make a quick copy. So the fact that you were caught red-handed with an unknowing old man's keys really makes you the suspicious one here. You're going to be in prison for a long time when I'm done with my alibi. Sounds great. Can you just kill me instead? No, that would make me a murderer, duh. By the way, since you can't see your phone, I'll tell you where Finn is. He's in this chat with me, and he saw my messages telling him I'm in the basement with you, and he has to come and see what we found. He's on his way as we speak. Hector groaned, probably thinking I was falling into Naomi's trap. But I was one step ahead of her. As I made my way through the vents, I had stopped every few seconds to put my plan into action. She actually did text me that she found something in the basement, but that was after Jim had already called 911. I had been texting Naomi as if I didn't know what was going on. To Naomi, I was still clueless and was on my way to the basement entrance. But I knew exactly what was going on. I texted her to ask where they were, and Naomi texted back and told me she would meet me at the door to the basement when I arrived, where she probably planned to pour out a sob story about how she found Hector with the taxidermies and had to tase him in self-defense. So, it was now or never. I gripped my phone and quietly typed in a message. Hey, I'm at the basement door. Can you let me in? Naomi sounded triumphant. And here he is now. I'll be right back. I heard her walk away from Hector and to go up the steel steps. I heard Hector struggling against his restraints, probably feeling annoyed that he was duped so easily by a human. I waited for Naomi to arrive at the top of the stairs to unlock the door. That meant she was far enough away for me to make my entrance and untie Hector. I kicked the vent open, slid out, and ran up to Hector, fully aware of the loud noise I had made. Unfortunately, Naomi was aware of the noise as well. Startled, she asked, "What was that?" I heard her footsteps coming back down and furiously cut at the ropes binding Hector's wrists with the Swiss Army knife that Jim gave me. "Good shit, Finn," Hector grinned. "Distracting her with a fake text while you save me? Quick thinking. I love it. It's like you're learning from me. Please, you clearly thought I was falling into her trap, but let's hope the cops are as quick as my thinking," I replied, cutting him free. It had been a while since Jim called the police, and I hoped they were on their way. Hector flexed his hands and got up. In her rush, Naomi didn't tie any of his other limbs, but in her defense, Hector had no strength to fight her anyway, even if she did. One thing, though, how do you expect us to escape when she has a super strong taser? I mean, I'm barely keeping it together, and I don't know if you can handle her by yourself. She's weirdly strong. Crazy people are always weirdly strong. I glanced at the knife and baseball bat, holding both out to Hector. Take your pick. Finn, how did you get here? Naomi emerged into view with her taser. She looked frazzled at the turn of events and was visibly frantic. Hector grabbed the baseball bat from me and brandished it. Don't bother trying to defend yourself. I already know everything, I said quickly, just in case she tried to defend herself. All right, I'm not usually a fan of ambush. Who am I kidding? I love ambush. 2 against 1. Let's do this. Hector looked giddy. I grabbed his sleeve and held him back. We are not hurting her. Hitting people is only okay in self-defense, I reminded him. She tased me and threw cold water on me. I'm defending myself from what she already did. Naomi took a step forward, and we braced ourselves. Why are you guys doing this? You're ruining everything. I thought we were friends, but I knew I shouldn't have gotten others involved. You don't understand where I'm coming from. No one does. No one understands me, ever. She started tugging at her hair, and I finally saw how unhinged she really was. It reminded me distinctly of Amy, because you're killing people's animals and sending them to their porches, and we don't want to be a part of it? You're pretty sick in the head. Doesn't this mean you killed your own cat? Hector said, matter-of-factedly. Naomi shook her head. Stacy was necessary to throw people off my trail. People had been getting suspicious of me, but if I adopted my own cat who disappeared, people would give me sympathy instead. Won't they? But you've ruined everything. I flinched as she charged forward, but as luck would have it, she froze in her place when uniformed cops came into the basement, belting, "Police! Don't move!" Hector and I dropped our weapons, held up our hands, and she whipped around to uniformed police stomping down the stairs in gear. She gave us one last helpless look before she was apprehended by the police and told her Miranda rights. I looked up to see Jim behind a squad of police, looking down at me and asking if we were okay. I nodded quickly, and he looked relieved. He was ushered away by the police who told him it was too dangerous to be here. And at Jim's feet, I saw Stacy. She took one last glance at me and turned on her little paws, disappearing from sight. Hector was right. Cats were weird. Naomi was arrested. She had taxidermized 8 cats, killed a few others in the area she lived in previously, and had gotten too careless. She knew that no one went far into the basement, not even Jim, as it was just an extra little hallway area. Jim told authorities never went beyond a certain part of the basement, because all the supplies he ever needed were near the stairs, and never in the dim hallway, which was just an extra hallway leading into the vents, which I crawled through. He admitted he had never been back in the small hallway area in his years as superintendent once. Naomi was able to get away with sending taxidermies because she worked part-time at the packing center and figured out a way to send the packages to their owners without being noticed. She also lied about being an art student. It was just her alibi for having so many paints and brushes in her room, which she used for the taxidermies. She looked young for her age, but she was actually 30 years old, and she had been arrested before for dropping dead squirrels on people's porches back in her neighborhood. She was a minor then, so it didn't officially count, but she had a long history of killing animals. Sometimes, the real scary monsters were humans, not demons. If Amy and Naomi were any sign of it, Jim felt guilty about the pets and personally apologized to every single owner who was a victim of Naomi's crimes. I also found that Jim personally hated cats because one killed his cockatiel, which was why he had it taxidermized. It was basically the only thing he had left, save for his daughter, who lived a few states across from him. His wife passed a while ago. I wondered if he knew that Stacy was the reason he wasn't framed for the pet murders. Would he have changed his mind? That's not the end of story. Wait for the next part. Until then, if you liked my video, then hit the like button and comment down your views. For more content like this, do subscribe my channel.